Hi, everyone. Why don't we get started? It's so great that you could join us today to talk about a new report called Laws in Order, an inventory of state renewable energy siting policies. I'm Ben Hohen. I'm a staff scientist at Berkeley Lab, and I'm joined today by Nelson Falkenberg, a clean energy siting associate at the Clean Air Task Force, and Raphael Tisch, a senior advisor of siting and permitting at DOE in the EERE office, and also Sean Enterline, a senior associate at the Regulatory Assistance Project. You're going to hear from all of them today, but I'm just going to start with a little bit of housekeeping to get everything in order here. So you'll know as you join today that you are in mute only mode. That was intentional. We want to keep the mics off so we can make sure that the presentation runs smoothly, but we want to hear from you. So if you'll look around on the lower part of your screen, you should see a Q&A button. That's the Q&A window. That's where you can submit questions. Please feel free to submit them at any time during the presentation. If they're technical in nature regarding connectivity or something that we can answer at that time, we will. If they're related to the report contents and the presentation, we'll probably wait to get to them at the end of the presentation. After Nelson, Raphael, and Sean speak, there should be plenty of time to answer questions. Also, this webinar is recorded. So actually, I have a disclaimer I'm going to read real quick, which is this presentation is recorded and may be posted on DOE's website or used internally. If you do not wish to have your voice recorded, please do not speak, which actually you cannot speak anyway. If you do not wish to have your image recorded, please turn off your camera. I think your cameras are automatically off as well. But if you don't want your name mentioned or things like that, and you submit a question, you could submit it anonymously. This recording of the webinar today and the slides you'll see today will be posted on our website, where the landing page is for this report. Probably will take a day or two, maybe by tomorrow afternoon, it will be there. We will go out to all the registrants, whether they are here today joining or not, and let them know that that has occurred so folks can look at the slides and the recording at that time. So with that, why don't we hand it over? I believe, Nelson, you are first in line. Take it away.
Great. Thanks for the intro, Ben. Hi, everyone. My name is Nelson Falkenberg. I'm a Clean Energy Siting Associate at Clean Air Task Force, and I am going to talk a little bit about the background and collaboration on the project and really dive into how this all started. So first, we'll be using some terminology folks on this webinar are likely familiar with. If you're here, you're probably an energy wonk like us. We want to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. So first, when we talk about siting and permitting, we mean both the decision-making process and the act of obtaining necessary permits. So siting refers to project location evaluation and site selection, review of zoning ordinances and standards, the securing of necessary leases and parcels, and community outreach. Siting is often used more generally also to refer to the process of decision-making around projects. For permitting, that's more of the stepwise process of acquiring permission to build a project within the scope of prescribed rules and standards. Standards are the rules that are adopted by regulators at the state or local levels to specify what is and isn't allowed in the construction and operation of facilities. For instance, standards may establish setbacks of X number of feet from a solar project to a property line, or a tip height of X number of feet from a wind turbine, or decibel levels measured from a prescribed distance. You get the idea. Those are standards. Zoning ordinances are local regulations managing land use and development. And then in the report, when we talk about state level decision-making bodies, we're referring to entities that provide oversight over project siting and permitting, and or entities that regulate public utilities. Decision-making bodies most often include public utility commissions, state siting boards, and natural resource agencies. So a little bit about the scope of the challenge and why we felt this project was necessary. According to Princeton's Net Zero America report, as well as many other analyses, we need to increase and accelerate the pace and scale of wind, solar, and transmission construction over the next 2 decades to meet mid-century decarbonization goals. While the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law have addressed some of the techno-economic challenges facing renewable projects, driving down material costs and improving the financial outlook for projects with generous tax credits, the socio-political challenges, which have always been present, are now some of the most significant barriers to deploying new renewable projects. According to a recent survey conducted by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory of large-scale wind and solar developers, local opposition and local and state permitting processes rise to the top of a list of barriers to project development and are responsible for most project cancellations and project delays over 6 months. As these socio-political barriers facing clean energy become increasingly salient, we wanted to better understand the laws and regulations underpinning the permitting process. Furthermore, a couple of years ago, we also recognized that states across the country were beginning to grapple with this issue too. In just the last few years, several states have adopted renewable energy siting policy reforms, beginning with New York in 2020, establishing the Office of Renewable Energy Siting. And some reforms, like New York's, vested more siting and permitting authorities in state agencies, while other reforms, like Ohio, vested more authorities in local governments. As states were adopting these reforms, we increasingly heard from developers, advocates, and policymakers a desire to better understand the existing landscape of state siting policies. So I began to dig into this project by putting together a huge spreadsheet comparing a laundry list of policy elements across 9 states, covering governmental jurisdictions, siting standards, environmental requirements, timelines, community benefits, anything I could get my hands on. Then I met with Ben Hohen, Kendra Kostek, and Raphael Tisch at an American Clean Power Association conference on siting and permitting. I told them about the work, and they decided that we shouldn't stop at 9 states. We should develop an inventory that covers all 50 states plus Puerto Rico. We also learned around that same time that some colleagues at American Clean Power and the Consensus Building Institute were partnering to develop an inventory for several key states. So we invited them to join our effort. This led to an ad hoc collaborative partnership between our groups, and we brought in the Regulatory Assistance Project for additional analytical firepower and to draft the report itself. This collaboration was especially beneficial because it channeled all of our efforts and resources into one product and expanded the tent to a broader group of stakeholders and avoided duplicating work across all of our organizations. I also want to give a special shout out to a couple of interns or a handful of interns who did a lot of the data gathering grunt work on this project. Annabelle Williams at CATF and Angela Ferguson and Patrick Collins at Consensus Building Institute were instrumental in this project, and it would not have been a success without them. So thank you very much for all of your hard work. More than a year later, we're really excited to bring this report to the world. And now I'll pass it off to Raph, who will introduce you to our literature review, methods, motivation, report scope, and demo our interactive map. Raph, take it away.
Thanks, Nelson. I'm going to talk a little bit about what this report is and isn't. And as Nelson mentioned, I'll demo the map that DOE developed for our siting and permitting website in conjunction with this research. So you can kind of go and explore interactively the different state policies and siting authorities and other key elements that are included in the report itself. As Nelson mentioned, state siting regulations and policies and authorities are very complex. They're varied, and they often differ widely with respect to technology type, size, and characteristics. From our perspective, the real motivation for this report was to help provide a census of the policy landscape for policymakers, developers, and advocates that are considering different ways to meet their renewable energy goals, and maybe learn from other states about how they're doing it. We are also hopeful that this report will enable novel research relating to how different policy configurations influence siting outcomes. When we began our research, we identified two key resources which provided a useful starting point for our investigation, which were a 2020 report from the National Council of State Legislators and a 2020 report from the University of Michigan's Graham Sustainability Institute. While these are excellent resources, we wanted to take a deeper dive into the research and provide more information on each state's siting and policies and processes alongside a comparative analysis. Using these documents as a basis for our research, we also conducted general internet searches of state siting policies and supplemented by statutory and regulatory information from PowerSuite and Enernol databases. For each state, we found high-level information in news articles and technical guides. We identified the relevant statutes, and then we reviewed agency regulations. And we conducted this, as Nelson said, over the course of a year from the June 2023 to February of this year. The siting and permitting of renewable energy is a huge field, so we needed to narrow our research efforts in order to produce something more meaningful. And through our research, we narrowed down the scope to include technology, government jurisdiction, availability of information and law, and key policy elements, which are here on the screen. In terms of technology, it's really important to note that this report is focused primarily on siting and permitting requirements for utility scale onshore wind and solar projects. Although there are necessarily some entries on transmission, offshore wind, energy storage, and distributed solar, where the authorities for these technologies overlap, those aren't the focus of the research. And as I kind of note here, that also presents an opportunity for future research to expand upon this report or our findings. In terms of governmental jurisdiction, this report specifically only captures state authorities for siting and permitting on renewable projects. It does not look at local government regulations and ordinances in detail, but it does highlight where governments have the authority, where local governments have the authority to set those siting standards. And while local governments play a key role in siting and permitting, a number of local jurisdictions and ordinances tracking that was far beyond what we could conceivably catalog while we were doing this. Also, NREL and others have previously worked to catalog a census of solar and wind ordinances in databases available through the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And I think those data are from 2020 and 2021. And additional efforts are underway there to explore how to expand those, since like state siting and permitting policies, ordinances are a fairly dynamic element of the siting process that has tended to change over time. We bounded our report by focusing on the availability of information in statute and regulation, which means there may be a bit of a difference between how the laws are applied in practice. There may be some deviation in siting processes from what's on the page to what happens on the ground. And to note, we didn't do any interviews or surveys of stakeholders involved in the siting process, besides some high-level QA, QC towards the end of the document, where we asked folks to weigh in on our initial findings and help us structure the report a little bit more clearly. We also narrowed down the focus of the report from a huge laundry list of key policy elements that Nelson mentioned a little bit earlier to what we thought would be of the greatest importance to the stakeholders reading this document. And those include the primary siting and permitting authority in a state, if it's at the state level, the local level, or some combination, which you'll see many states are contingent and have some authority at local level for certain size projects, and then that bumps up to the state level for other size projects. We also looked at the standard setting authority, who establishes ordinances or siting regulations in the state. We extrapolated where we could timelines and where states had regulations for permitting approvals and public engagement, looked at the public involvement requirements of those states, and where states have resources published for developing model ordinances, for instance. So the report took a considerable amount of time for us to compile. And I think it's really important to note that, as of 2012, as of February of 2024, there may be things that we did not include or that we missed or that hadn't yet been implemented into law. And so this is kind of a request to the audience and the users of this document. If you see any errors, if you are aware of new policies that this report does not capture, if you're reviewing these documents, we encourage anybody anybody and everybody to send feedback or comments to the website, renewablesiting@ee.doe.gov. This is also an email and is noted in the report itself. So if you're reviewing, it would be really great for you to send any of that feedback to us. It's our hope that we can keep this resource up to date and periodically make changes to the report on a rolling basis. And your help there, your input there will be really helpful for us. So really quickly now, I will just pivot over to a quick demonstration of the map, and then we will pass it on to Sean Enterline at the Regulatory Assistance Project to help us to dive a little bit into the findings of the report. So just bear with me here for 1 second. This is EERE's citing website. So you can go to EERE's website or Google EERE citing, and this will come up as one of the first 1 or 2 hits in Google. And scrolling down the page, we've embedded this really nice interactive map that reflects the information and the data in the report. You can hover over individual states and get a really high level overview of the authority. And I'll just note that this is one of maybe 6 or 7 maps in the report that highlight a lot of the different data and analysis that the team did. This one shows the primary authority for large-scale land-based wind and solar projects. As you can see, it's kind of based on the categories that we have for local siting, for state-level siting, for both and contingent. Sean is going to get into the details of the definitions of those, so you don't get too confused about that at this point. So I'll let him take that. But just quickly, you can go to the map. Wisconsin here is what I'm highlighting, and you can click on it, and it'll take you right to the report itself. And this is the structure of the report. It kind of shows some of those key elements across the top, an authority summary here in the middle, timelines, public involvement details, and other published resources and guidelines. So for instance, here in Wisconsin, they have model ordinances for solar and wind, and those are linked here. So if you're looking for an example of solar ordinances or wind ordinances, Wisconsin and many other states in this report have those resources available. Once you're in the document, there's some nice navigation features. You can click on the top right of a state, and that takes you back to the state profile index. And then you can navigate through other states here if you're interested, or just back to the map itself. You just have to click on the tab that the map is. With that said, again, just encouraging folks, if you see errors or you see omissions, please do not hesitate to reach out to renewablesiting@eere.doe.gov, and we will work to hopefully update those comments in the near future. With that, I will pass it over to Sean to talk about the analysis and findings.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Sean with the Regulatory Assistance Project, and as a member of the research team for this project. And I just have 9 slides to highlight the maps with a couple of supporting bullets that summarize our findings as we went through the research. But first, as Raphael mentioned, I want to get clear on the nomenclature, really. When we looked through the literature review at the beginning of the project, we were given a kind of a three-part categorization that included local and state, which we kept, of course, and hybrid showed up quite a lot. And as we continued with the research and discussed it amongst ourselves, we really felt hybrid wasn't descriptive enough, so we broke it out into a category that is labeled both. Those 6 states are in a situation where both the state and the local government have some authority. We phrase that a little bit general just because it doesn't necessarily mean a sharing of authority. It's really dependent on the state, but they're both kind of equally involved in our assessment. But importantly, the 4th category is new, and it was by far our largest category. These contingent states have a statutory structure where they have typically picked a megawatt threshold that's measured in megawatts of installed project capacity. And if you're above that threshold as a project, the principal authority moves to the state. And if you're below that threshold, it typically is delegated to the local government authorities. So we'll get into that in a moment with the next slide and the next map. But the final thing I want to convey with respect to principal authority is this high-level definition we put at the top. It's not meant to be a binary or black and white. It's meant to be kind of directional, and I like the word leading here. Principal implies the leading authority. It does not imply any kind of exclusivity. It's very frequently the case that both the state and the local authorities are involved. We're just trying to characterize here with this label who's in the lead. So this is a map of the principal authority categories themselves. Contingent states are dual colored, and a couple of things that I take away from this looking at it is first that adjacent states do take cues from their neighbors with respect to their policy. So frequently, but not always, you'll see adjacent states with similar structures. The other takeaway is more global and doesn't just apply to this map. There, at least to my eyes, weren't any intra-regional trends to be discerned. So it's really reflective of each state having its own approach to siting and permitting. So here's the map that gets into the details on contingent states. So if the state in this map has a color, it fell into the one of 27 states that has a contingent structure. If the state is gray, it's meant to be in the background and really isn't the subject of the map. The takeaways here are kind of obvious, I think. Megawatt thresholds were very common, and they were almost completely less than or equal to 100 megawatts in size. The outliers I did want to call out briefly because they're interesting. New Mexico, for example, has a 300 megawatt threshold, relatively large. And Washington is worth noting because the statute there is structured in such a way that the developers themselves have a choice as to who leads them through the process with respect to jurisdiction and authority. So that was unique. The final comment I want to make concerns the mixed category. There's 12 states here, and if you consult the document, right below this map is a table that details how they differ when they're in this mixed category. Minnesota is a very good example where they have a 5 megawatt threshold for wind and a 50 megawatt threshold for solar. But there's a few other examples where you see acreage show up. That's a threshold that you see, and I think one state even had the number of wind turbines as a metric. So the next set of questions came in kind of a pairing. The researchers were concerned with finding what timeline, if any, is specified in the statute. So when we found our way to the governing statute in each state, we asked the team to report out and give us the data on any timelines that are present. So that was pretty common. 31 states did have a timeline. They ranged from as little as 30 days to more than a year. And the start time, the start moment for the clock procedurally was a little bit different. Sometimes it was just the application date, but frequently we saw a completeness determination as the start date for the clock. So a little bit of variation there to pay attention to. And this third bullet just alludes to the fact that when we as a team saw timelines in the statute, at the same time, we frequently ran into a public engagement requirement as well, which is the topic of the next slide. So this is an example where the maps look similar. There were 34 states here as compared to 31 with the timeline. And the conclusion is pretty straightforward. They called out, or the statutes call out either a public meeting or a hearing when they specify a public involvement requirement. So the next two findings were also kind of paired up in my mind. As we did the research, we started running into guidebooks, basically. And the audience for these guides were twofold. Frequently, the guidebook was targeted at the developer themselves so that they knew how to navigate through the process. But we also found examples of guides that were a little more targeted at landowners and how they could enter the process as well and represent their interests. So a little bit less than half the states we found published guidance here. Sometimes it's wind, sometimes it's solar, sometimes it's both. And importantly, it wasn't always the state or state agency that was the publisher. We found examples where these guides are published by nonprofits or working groups that were convened within the states. I think there might be an example of an academic institution or two. So as Raphael demonstrated in the state profiles, we have both a citation and a hyperlink where we had can direct you to the exact document publisher that we found. Model ordinances. So just by way of example, the easiest example is setbacks. When a project is built, local authorities want to control their land use, and they almost always specify a setback, a distance between the project and some other feature of the landscape, a highway, a home, a school. So model ordinances are common. You see them in the majority of states for solar, only 18 states for wind. My home state's a good example of this. Pennsylvania, where I grew up, is a state where principal authority is vested in the local governments. And so what the state has done is use its resources to publish a model ordinance that just says, hey, we're not telling you what to do, but based on our research, this is what other local governments within our state and region are doing. So it's kind of some guidance available in these states. And the second bullet, same as the last bullet on the previous slide. State agencies frequently are the publisher, but there were examples of others. So please refer to the report for the citation and a hyperlink there. Our sixth and final finding was about standards. Most often, local governments have the authority over setting standards, but there was a little bit of nuance here, and the middle bullet is meant to convey it, and the states with both green and blue are meant to show it. So the nuance is this: when you have local with state requirements, as we labeled it in the category, it's an instance where the state has set a minimum threshold for standards, but they're still leaving the final say to the local government as long as they exceed that standard. So there were 14 instances of that. And this last slide, I'll just be brief. Raphael's already given you a tour of the profiles. So I think with that, we'll move into Q&A, and I'll let you take over again, Ben.
Great, thanks everyone. And we have had a very active Q&A session while Sean and Nelson and Raphael have been presenting. So we have a lot to cover here. I'm going to be the MC and just feed questions back to the other presenters. There are maybe one or two that I can address. So let's just go from the top. The first question is, can you talk more about the purpose of model ordinances and why a state that doesn't currently have model ordinances for wind or solar might want to develop some? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
I'm happy to, Ben. Great. So model ordinances allow a state entity to provide useful guidance and technical support to local governments who may not have established zoning ordinances for siting and permitting renewable energy projects and may not have the expertise to develop those ordinances on their own and may need outside guidance. And additionally, model ordinances can set out best practices and promote consistency across local government jurisdictions for zoning renewable energy projects in the state. So those are a couple of reasons why a state may want to provide model ordinances for wind and solar.
Hey, Nelson, while you have the mic, would you say that model and ordinances are only there for bigger systems? Meaning, is there a threshold size where model ordinances would make sense? Or is it sort of a mix and match approach depending on the state and where they are available?
I think it's more the latter. I think it's mix and match, and I don't think that model ordinances necessarily need to be restricted to project size. I do think that larger projects lend themselves more to a model ordinance framework, as they're often more challenging to cite. So that's what I would add.
All right, Ralph, maybe I'll ask this for you because you mentioned sort of what the report covers and what it doesn't. Distributed energy resources were omitted. We talked about large scale projects in general. Why was that? And are you aware of any comparative report, similar kind of report focused on DERs?
Yeah, thanks. To answer the last question first, I personally am not aware of a DER related report at the same level. I think one of the reasons, the main reasons why distributed energy sources were not included here was just to narrow the scope a little bit to what we were able to do in a year. As I noted in my slides, and I think Nelson noted also, the universe of siting policies across the states is pretty broad, and we didn't have a chance really to dig into many other factors or many other technology sizes and types in this iteration of the report. It's something we're interested in looking into. I think this type of report could benefit, or I think other technologies could benefit from this type of report, certainly, particularly around technologies, more emerging technologies like hydrogen, distributed energy resources, in certain cases, offshore wind, geothermal, bioenergy, and certain applications of water power technologies.
Thanks for that. And I'll just note for all the attendees, there are some questions coming in via chat. It's a little tough for us to monitor that. So if you don't mind, if you have submitted a question in the chat, just copy and paste it into the Q&A window. That's really where we're monitoring it. We might not get to the ones that are in chat. Question for Sean. Does local mean county or city or town? How do you think about local when you're for this report?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was more often county to my memory. Occasionally it was at the municipal level, but it was just tended to be up one level to my memory. I'd invite others because it was a large body of work.
And Sean, maybe just to clarify, I don't think we're defining local in this report, but local is being defined by what we found as where the lower level of authority was. So what that authority was in the state was how we define local for that state. We're not ascribing local to mean county or to mean town.
On this sort of same subject of as to what is included and what is not, and Sean, this might be for you first, and then Ralph can reflect as well. Did the report touch on how state and local processes interact with siting of projects on public lands? Obviously it's a big issue out in the West with the Bureau of Land Management.
Yeah, so that information doesn't appear in the state profiles, but I think in the bibliography we do have a series of resources by some of the national labs with respect to public lands and tribal lands, if I recall correctly. So as you pointed out, Ben, the big issue in the West, and we didn't go deep on it with respect to the state profiles. Trying to remember the name of the resource that Think NREL has that's so good on this topic. Yeah, it'll come back to me. I'll maybe put it in the chat. There's an excellent resource on how public and particularly federal land and tribal land works in Western states.
And I think maybe a little bit more color there, Sean, is that, again, just trying to narrow the scope of this report, we tried to focus on state siting policies, not federal siting policies, because that is a whole other bag. And we just needed to narrow the scope of this down to something that was manageable for the team and for the time we had to do it.
Okay, again, sort of thinking about the report in general, and Nelson, maybe I'll start with you on this because, as you mentioned early on, it was really your initial efforts to prepare a inventory that this group built off of, and that became the national look. How do you think about dates and times when you're thinking about these ordinances? When are you tracking when they were established? Are you, and does that come into play when you think about how folks should use this report? If there's for example, something on the books from 20 years ago, will that be different than how, or something that's on the books just a year ago?
Yeah, good question, Ben. So first I'll say that our report was really focused on what is written in statute or regulation, not what occurs in practice. So the timelines that are reflected in the report are those that are in law, not necessarily how projects are actually approved and permitted in practice. So a timeline of a year may get extended in some cases to be a year and a half, and in other cases may move faster than that. So we weren't able to, and we decided not to try to take a more prescriptive approach. It's purely descriptive of what the universe is of timelines. And I think I would also add that one of the findings that Sean pointed out that we thought was compelling was how states define a starting point for these projects, and basically when the shot clock begins, and that differs widely across states and leads to some big deltas in these timelines. And finally, maybe the last thing I'll say on this is, since we didn't capture in our report how these statutes have changed over time, I think I saw that question too, and that was something we would have liked to have captured. If a piece of legislation passed in 2021, you're not going to necessarily see that reflected in the report, but we did link to all of the statutes and provided citations. So with a little bit of elbow grease and digging, you can dive in, find the amendments, and crosswalk when these statutes came into being. But yeah, we weren't able to go down that rabbit hole. It's an incredible amount of work to do that, but it would be a huge benefit for the literature if somebody was interested in that.
Yeah, and to that point too, Nelson, like kind of tracking what's currently on legislative dockets throughout states is something of interest to us. It's not something we're doing right now. I think maybe NASIO might be looking into something like that this summer, but I'm not sure what the extent of that work is going to be. But I think it would be a tremendous sort of regulatory timeline map that could be interesting to sort of track trends and just the inertia of change that we're seeing over time. I think last time I looked, maybe there was a report, I'm not remembering who published it, but it was, looking at 6 or 7 Midwestern states and what they had on their legislative dockets right now. And that just really kind of inspired me to think more broadly about this. And it's a great question. It's something that I think would be very useful for there to be a central tracking location for.
And I'll just take a stab at kind of a few questions here, building off of what Nelson said. So in terms of thinking about deployment outcomes and timelines for the permitting process, these are projects that would take advantage of this inventory that exists, would allow potentially looking at for example, the level of wind and solar deployments in states that are predominantly state authority states, or vice versa, the states that have local authority, or for example, where there are different contingency levels where that changes. Those are all great questions in terms of deployment levels. Similarly, there are questions regarding the timelines of these processes. As Nelson pointed out, where to start the clock is not so easy to figure out. I will say that our lab, Berkeley Lab, has been recently awarded by the Solar Office and also supported by the Wind Energy Technologies Office to look into some of those things. So look into some of those timelines at a project level, to look at some of the outcomes of projects that are starting in on that process that might ultimately be removed from the process or delayed. So I guess what I can say to folks is keep your eyes and ears peeled for this in the future. But we would expect, given this very accessible inventory, that others will take a look at these same issues. And please reach out to me directly if that is something you're interested in, because maybe there are opportunities for collaboration there. Question for you, Sean. These data that are in the PowerPoint are accessible in the PowerPoint. People can click through the PowerPoint, but somebody quickly asked, how about putting it in a spreadsheet? What are the thoughts on that?
So Nelson wasn't joking about the great big spreadsheet that exists, and we QA'd maybe a little bit less than half of it, and we're able to publish it in the report. So I hate to redound the question back to you, Ben, but the data is available. It's a matter of presenting in that format, is my understanding.
Yeah, so there is a spreadsheet. It's not as clean and perfect as what's in the report. We currently don't have a plan to release that publicly, but might be the case that we can share it with individual researchers. We'd have to talk to our funders for that and allowing to do that. But so please reach out to me, maybe CC. You've got some other contacts there, CC the group, and we can get back to you on that. Question here regarding community benefit requirements. So that was noted on some states that there are various. Well, actually, let me ask just directly, did you look at where specific community benefits exist, and do you have links to those when they do?
Yeah, maybe you can share this one, Nelson. Yeah, we did try to look at this issue. It was one of the columns in our spreadsheet, and it didn't make the cut. It's not published in the report. Yeah, I'm going to stop there because I don't know how to characterize it.
From my perspective, and I did not look into this myself, this is just more anecdotal evidence from my own experience. I think there's only 1 or 2 states in the US that have legislated required community benefits agreements associated with renewable energy projects, Maine being one of them, and New York maybe being another. But it's not like, as clear as that. It's with some caveats, and so it's a little bit tricky at this point, but it'd certainly be interesting to see more of that.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I would also add Michigan's most recent siting bill also requires community benefits. But yeah, we do have some information on that. We'd probably, similarly to it's embedded in that massive spreadsheet, we'd be happy to share that with some individuals if you reach out. But it's not common across states that it's a statutory requirement.
Raphael, this is for you. Somebody noted there was already a Minnesota law just passed in May of 2024. There are similar laws passed in Michigan recently, other states as well. What are the current thoughts on updating this report? It's obviously extremely useful, but over time, as new laws come on the books and changes happen, it becomes less and less current and useful.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
That's a great question. There is not presently a project in place to update this report, but it's something we're looking at very carefully. I think as we see a weight of changes come in, if you submit those to, our email address that's listed in the report, the more I think we get those types of feedback, the more likely it is we're going to see an updated report come in. I'll just kind of note also that, we published, and I think there's been a few comments about this, the NREL solar and wind databases. Like, these efforts are really, really labor intensive. And so updating them is not always easy unless we can find, a pathway for that. So there are things that we're exploring, but it's just important to note that it's not yet on the books to do. But I'm hopeful that we can find the resources and the time to do this.
Great, thanks, Rob. This is for the whole group. Anybody want to take a stab at this? Any thoughts on why there's less published guidance in the southern states versus northern states?
Yeah, I don't know that that's universally true. I can think of at least a few southern states that do have some guidance. So, the intra-regional comparisons are very tough to draw conclusions from. And so that assessment, the report rather, is kind of silent on that assessment as a result. But there are excellent examples of states throughout the country that do have them, as the map shows.
But I would add too that it may be related to renewable energy potential. At least for wind has most often been cited in northern states, and so you're going to see a lot more siting permitting guides in those states rather than states like Louisiana or Alabama, which may not have the wind resource that the Midwest has, for example. So that may be one connection, but yeah, I'm not exactly sure about other reasons for that.
Okay, and there's actually a question in the Q&A saying, what happened to my questions? They were posted in chat, and as we mentioned in the beginning, we are not taking questions in chat. So if you do want to submit them again, please copy and paste them into the Q&A window, which is different than the chat window. Okay, let's see here. Just some quick ones here. Is anyone keeping track of siting litigations and the results? Are anybody aware here of kind of how these are being challenged and how those challenges are turning out?
I'll just refer the audience to, I think it's Columbia Law School's been publishing on this topic kind of annually for the past few years. So I'll try and look that up and put it in the chat, but there is some work going on in that area.
Thanks, Sean. Let's see here. Yeah, I don't know if folks will have a feel for this. In states that develop model ordinances, do they actually tend to get widely adopted by local jurisdictions? Meaning, any sense as to how useful that process is? Hopefully that's from somebody who works at the state level and is thinking about trying to get a model ordinance out there. Any thoughts on that? Okay, nothing there. Good question. I'm sure there are folks on this call that might be able to have a sense of that. Folks, for example, in the development community. Okay, any sense as to how different the model ordinances vary per state? Sean and folks doing the research, Nelson, do you see scenarios where it's really basic and just gets them started, and in other cases it's super detailed to allow those local entities to take that have less room to maneuver?
Yeah, I can start, and then Sean, feel free to tag in. I would say that in our review of model ordinances, we found that they tended to be fairly detailed, and provided kind of a framework for local governments and weren't entirely prescriptive in the ordinance. It truly is like a model, and then local governments can plug in different distances and so forth that align with their needs, their land use needs. So I was surprised by the level of detail, I guess. But Sean, I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, they were definitely detailed, Nelson. And I'm just thinking of format, which isn't really a substantive point to make. You know, the working groups, to my memory, put out working papers, and then some of the other publications are much more produced and formatted. But that says nothing about the content. The content, to my memory, was quite detailed as well, Nelson.
Getting pretty close here. I think we've gotten through. There's some very long comments which we're not going to address. I'm sorry about that. Well, we'll try this one. Any model ordinances that, again, in your opinion, stood out as particularly useful, maybe other states would want to look at? We talked about the value of this report being in that it might provide some states that are thinking about model ordinances an opportunity to go look at other states. Any ideas as to where they might start looking?
Well, I would just start by saying we really, in this report, are trying to just lay the foundation and put all of the information out there, and are not picking best practices or states that we think are doing, like, quote unquote, doing it right, because each state is very unique and has its own sociopolitical concerns and land use concerns. So I think we've strayed away from trying to identify a model ordinance that we think is best or better than other states. And but like Ben said, there's a ton of information in the report, and we hope folks will dive in and find for themselves which are better or best. But if other folks want to tag in, please.
Yeah, I'll just concur with what you said, Nelson. I think one of the outcomes of this report is hopefully that people can look at this data and analyze it against other variables within the state and figure out, what combination of policies is achieving the desired outcomes, right? It's not, DOE doesn't ascribe, outcomes as good or bad. The report here is just to really provide a census of what's going on, and that we're hoping that, deeper analyses of these data will enable folks to, come to conclusions about what combinations of policies leads to the outcomes that folks are looking for.
One last question coming in under the wire. Did you track, or do you have any sense as to the purpose of some of these ordinances? I mean, not ordinances, but state permitting laws, governing laws. It was pointed out that, long before we had wind and solar, we did have ordinances for siting and permitting, and therefore some of these are maybe still sitting on the books and being used for that. So any sense as to, well, did we track the purpose of the ordinance, the initial purpose? I think I know the answer to that, but I'll let folks answer that one. And is there any way to sort of distinguish them as folks click through the report?
I can start. I would say the answer to the first question is no. We did not track the purpose of the initial statute passing, and so you won't be able to filter through that in the report. I would say, though, that the question's a good question because it's accurate. In some cases, the permitting authority for wind and solar is also the same permitting authority as like a natural gas plant or similar fossil fuel infrastructure. So in some states, those haven't been separated out and they don't have separate permitting and siting processes. So yeah, it's a very good point and one that we didn't track or delve into in the report.
How about utility scale battery storage? Anything out there on that in terms of ordinances or governing a permitting authority? Anybody aware of that? Obviously, this is newer than solar, but coming on the scene very quickly.
Yeah, I don't remember bumping into it very commonly. What we did bump into, Ben, was there's a small handful of states that are starting to deal with offshore wind, which we did not, include ultimately in the publication. But yeah, I think it was probably an even smaller subset if we found it all of battery siting as we went about it.
Yeah, I would say some states may lump battery siting and permitting in with renewable energy siting and permitting in their statutes as like definitionally combine them in kind of covered in the same statutes. But it was rare, and we didn't focus on that in the report, and we didn't specifically tease that out.
Great. Well, we've reached the top of the hour. Great job, folks, in answering all those questions. And I think it's worthwhile making sure that we acknowledge the DOE for their leadership in this area, providing funding to get this report together, being the constant inspirer of making sure it happens, and it happens in a really great way. So thank you, the DOE, for supporting this on behalf of all stakeholders out there that are going to be able to use it. We are going to provide this recording of today's webinar on the report landing page. We will also provide the slide deck for that. That will also be on the landing page. That will probably happen tomorrow. It takes a little time to process, but you will be getting an email to that effect when that's available. So thanks again for everybody for joining us today. And with that, we'll sign off. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.